Hey crafty cuties, welcome back to my channel. As you can maybe see, I am in a new apartment. So moving in here kind of took up my whole weekend, which is why this week's video is coming up a little bit late. But, you know, better late than never. So basically this project was making a giant BMO from Adventure Time, and I'll put up a little picture of him right here. He's a little robot guy, so I made him for one of my friend's birthdays, and I was like, I'll make him kind of big because I wanted it to be like cuddleable, I guess is the word. So I was like, I'll make him like 20 inches. I did some measurements on like the proportions of him, and I eventually scaled it up to 20 inches tall, which I didn't think was gonna be that big, honestly, because 20 inches doesn't sound like a lot, like just a little more than a foot, but it ended up being really big, like as big as my torso and head. When I was like sitting next to it, it was as tall as I was, which you'll eventually see later on once it's finished. So the first thing I did was I went to go buy the yarn, and silly me, I think I maybe figured how much yarn I would use before I decided like how big I was actually gonna make it. I was like, I'm sure I'll only need 2 skeins of yarn. This was not the case, nor was that ever a possibility once I decided on making them 20 inches. As you can see here, I have the paper left over from me writing down my pattern and just keeping track of things as I went. It's the same paper that I used for my April walrus video. It's mostly tallies because this thing was huge and I needed to keep track of how many rows I'd done. And then you can just count them after the fact, but keeping tallies was a quicker way for me to count them. So as you can see up here, this was my first drawing of how big I thought it was gonna be. I think here it was like 20.1 by 16 by 7, which I thought 7 inches was a bit skinny, so I changed that to then eventually be 20 by 16 by 10, which then you can also see over here, which this is my front and back piece, my top and bottom piece, and my 2 side pieces. Okay, so I figured out how many stitches and how many rows to make each piece of him, of his body. His arms and legs are going to be something else I figure out. But I think it's safe to say that he's going to be bigger than I expected. This is the back, or the front, but this is the back because I'm going to do color changes on the front for his screen face. This is the side, so he's this wide. And this is the top and bottom, so again, just kind of goes to show you how wide he is. He gonna be big, and I only have 3 skeins left. One's only slightly used, and the other 2 are full skeins, so I'm thinking I'll have enough, but I don't ever want to say anything for sure. So you can see in this clip about how big every piece was. As I said in the clip, I had to figure out how long they would be, because if you've never tried to like crochet something to like a specific length before, usually once you do the base chain, if you're like, okay, now the base chain is 16 inches, or like the foundation chain, just like the initial chain, I'm not really sure what the technical term is, but the initial chain, if that is like 16 inches, then once you start crocheting into it, they'll kind of expand, and it'll probably end up like quite a bit longer, like maybe 18, maybe even 20 inches. Maybe not that much. I guess it probably depends on your tension and your weight, but with mine, when that was 16 inches, then I did like 2 rows and saw that it was up to like 17 and a half, so I took off like 10. I eventually ended up with 73 chains, giving me 16 inches, but then after I completely finished, I found out that it was back up to 17 again, so I probably should have taken off like 5 more rows, because typically what I found, 5 rows up is an inch, with at least what hook I was using and my tension, all that stuff. So I found that 5 rows up was about an inch. I think it's actually close to like 4.2 rows is an inch, based on like my calculations, because I did a lot of math during this to see about how much I would need to go. So going sideways was similar to like 5 inches equals 1 inch, but not quite. But regardless, even though it was a little off in the end, it didn't really matter, because he was so big that like any proportions that were off were kind of negated by his giant size. So yeah, the whole front was 20 by 16, and that in and of itself took an entire skein of yarn. And so once that happened, I was like, okay, well, if that took a whole skein, then the back's gonna take almost a whole skein. Not quite, because I was doing color changes for the face on the other piece, so I guess that technically makes it the front. But yeah, it wouldn't quite take that much, but it would take just about that much as a whole another skein. The top and bottom are half the size of the front and back, so 2 of those would take 1 skein. And since the left and right are a bit bigger than halfway, those would take a bit more than 1 skein themselves. So as you can see, I split this guy up into 6 pieces, 1 for each face of the box that is BMO's body. My original plan was to make like a giant granny square bottom and then to just build it straight up from there and then do decreases on the top. But I tried that on a smaller scale first, which was thinking ahead, which is something that I typically don't do for pattern making. So really good that I did that at first with on a small scale with a different color yarn. And I saw that the sides did not keep their shapes. The corners, like the right angles that would be created between like the front and the left, they weren't there. As you went higher, it just kind of like the bottom was a square. If I did it in back loops only, then the bottom transitioned in a pretty like nice angle, but then everything else up was just kind of a tube. And to avoid that, I decided it would probably be best to make every piece on its own and then sew them together, because that way they would fold in a way where I connected them and I would get those better perfect angles that were like crisper and just a lot better for like the actual box shape that I was going for. So after I had finished all of the pieces on the front, I was going to start making the embellishments, such as the buttons, which you can see in this next clip. So I just finished all the little buttons. I actually didn't just finish. I finished them a long time ago, but then I took a long break to go make a cake. So don't worry about that. But you can see I've already sewn on the little D-pad. I lightly stuffed it. It's kind of bringing everything up because it doesn't sit flat, but I think it'll be fine because once it's all stuffed, it won't need to sit flat, and I think it'll be fine. Hopefully it'll be fine. So after I finished the buttons, I wanted to do the rest of the embellishments, being the word BMO on his side and his face. So I always knew I was going to do felt for his eyes because I found crochet rounds as eyes tend to look pretty creepy, because like eyes with a bunch of holes in them are a little unsettling, especially if you have tryptophobia. I think that's what it's called, the one where you're scared of a bunch of little dots. But yeah, I've seen dolls that have crochet rounds for eyes, and no, that's not the move. So I knew I was going to do his eyes with felt. And I was originally not going to do the letters with felt, I was going to do them with crochet, but then I was like, I really don't know how to get like the spaces between the B, and it would probably take me a long time to figure it out, and it was already closing in on the day, and like I said, I wanted to have it done in time, even though I wasn't going to get done in time, and I probably never was with all the other work I had going on. But I caved, and I was going to do the letters with felt, as you can see in this next clip. So I have my little letters printed out, and I'm going to try to cut them out of felt. I'm going to try to use a box cutter. I don't have any fabric scissors, or like a rotary cutter, because I know those would probably be really good. But I kind of don't expect the box cutter to work, and if it doesn't, I'm going to just use scissors. And I also need to cut out his little face, his eyes, and his mouth. I need to figure out how big I need to make those too. I was originally going to try to cut them out with a Cricut because I had borrowed a Cricut from one of my cousins to help me do some other schoolwork, but the Cricut didn't have a felt setting, and I didn't want to risk it because whenever I did bigger stuff with that Cricut, I found that it kind of got off. So I was like, better not waste felt, I'll just do it with a box cutter, so I can do 2 at once. Box cutter did not work, so I ended up just folding the felt over on itself and using my fabric scissors, which are the teeny tiny ones I use for yarn because those are the only ones I have. But it ended up working out pretty fine. As I suspected, the box cutter didn't work, but I just cut them out with my tiny little yarn scissors that I used to snip off my yarn. So now it's gonna be the arduous process of sewing this on by hand. Yeah, I'm not looking forward to it. I was originally going to try to sew through the felt with needle and thread. But yeah, obviously, that was going to take forever, which is why I wanted to do crochet for letters in the first place, because then I could use a yarn darner and just go through the loops, and it would have been much quicker. Even though it still would have been sewing, it wouldn't have been sewing with a needle and thread, which would have been a lot more stitches because the thread is tinier than the yarn. But it didn't matter because I didn't have enough yarn in my little sewing kit to do that anyway, and I ended up using fabric glue. Craft Bond, Elmer's Craft Bond. It's supposed to work really well for a lot of like craft stuff. I know it's not fabric glue or felt glue, which they even have, but it's the stuff I have. So we're gonna hope it works because I don't really have another option. So we're gonna see if this holds, and if it doesn't, I can always hand sew it at another point once I have more thread. And a needle I can put the thread through, because I only had ones that were super tiny and couldn't do it. I didn't think fabric glue would be the move. I didn't think it would hold great, and honestly, it didn't. I had to use a lot of coats. But I eventually figured, like, hey, if the eyes or the letters fall off, I can always take a needle and thread to the finished piece and sew it back together at a later date if he ever needs me to do that, or like he could do it, or anyone could really sew it on. Obviously, if I had a sewing machine, I could have sewed it down as like first and it would have been no issue, but I don't have a sewing machine. And if I did, I probably wouldn't have a sewing machine nice enough to handle like thick layers of crochet. But after doing that felt stuff, I then did the smile of BMO. I tried to do that with felt first, but because it was so skinny, it was like always losing its shape and I didn't want to have to worry about it. So I just ran a piece of yarn between 2 points, like in here, out there, so it was super loose. And then I just by hand like took the middle of it and pulled it down to where it looked like a smile and tacked it down in a few spots, and then I like went over those spots with embroidery to make the smile like fuller. And it worked pretty good. I used that same method on like his little his 2 little lines on the bottom of him, and I did that there. And also on the back of him, he has a big square that's like, I guess, where his battery pack is, and I did that on the back as well. And that method worked pretty good. And then on the back as well, he has these vents, I think was what they are, which are just like big black rectangles, and those I actually did with crochet. I just did big black rectangles and I tacked them down, and it worked really nice. But next thing I went on to was his arms. I don't have any footage of it because I found his arms to be pretty easy. The weird thing was he has 3 fingers and like a thumb kind of finger. I don't know if you can call it a thumb because he's a robot, but that's like what his hand is. And in most pictures of him, his arm kind of looks like this with 3 fingers like this. So his thumb would then be behind them, I guess. And that's what I tried to do, but it was a bit hard because like his hand looks like this looking at it straight on, which looks a bit weird. One of my friends said it looks like the bottom of a plastic soda bottle, and that's absolutely true. That is what it looked like. I don't know if I have any video of his hand like that. I might, and you might see it later on, but it looked a bit weird, but it looked fine looking at it head on, so it was perfectly fine. So what I did with his hand was I made each of his fingers separately, and on the 4th one, instead of fastening it off, I stitched them together, which is a practice you've probably seen before if you've done a lot of Amigarumi, where you make like 2 separate legs and then you stitch them together and build up from there. There's a lot of patterns that do that if you don't sew on the legs afterward. Like I've done a giraffe that was similar, where you made all the legs and then you held them together and then you kind of did that and you sewed up the bottom. So I thought that was a good way to do his hands, and it worked out pretty well because from there I just did a tube, and the tube had to be, the end circumference had to be the length of the inner part of the felt O, because that's how he looks in the pictures. His arm comes like directly out of the middle of his felt O. Well, not felt on him, I guess. And so after I did the arms, the next thing was the feet, and I was dreading doing the legs and the feet. I know I said the feet first and then the legs, but same thing, because there's one piece for him. It's a tube that then goes like this, like an L, which if you've done crochet and you've ever wanted to do an amigurumi where you have like, okay, so like his head comes this way and then his neck goes down, which is a very like niche thing, I get, but like I wanted to do that for like a giraffe or something. Basically what you realize is the rounds build like this. They come out from left to right at first, or up to down, however you want it. Since I'm using a giraffe, we'll say we build his head like this, and then we want his neck to then go down. So it needs to make a hard turn. And that's just not something that you can do, because if the round's going like this, you can't just then make the circle turn like that. I thought I could maybe do it with like doing double crochets at the top and singles down here, eventually making it get kind of top heavy in a way and maybe curl down, which maybe would have worked, but it didn't seem like it was going to. So right now I'm working on the foot. I've just done the part that is the foot, and now I'm going to try to do the leg. I think what I'm gonna try to do is like basically decrease on half of it and increase on the other half, and then hopefully that makes it, instead of going this way like it is, hopefully that'll pull it upwards, because that's kind of what happened when I did the dragon video that I made a few weeks back. That's kind of how it worked, and that's kind of like how I'm thinking it'll work, because if one side's shrinking and the other's growing, it's gonna like eventually go like that. But I'm not sure if that's gonna work, because I found a method that worked a lot better. I googled it, and I should have known that someone else had figured out a way, because it seems like a common enough thing to try to do. And I have a video explaining exactly how I do that, because I figured with just my words it would not read. So I took a video when I did the second leg after I figured out that it worked on the first one, and you can see my whole process of figuring that out right in these clips. So yesterday I did figure out how to do the foot, getting the crochet to turn, and I think it looks pretty good. The place that it turns isn't super crisp. Like, I kind of shaped this by just morphing it with my hands a bunch to mold the stuffing inside. It doesn't get you like a super 90-degree turn like you can make with your hand, but it's pretty good. And it especially looks good on this side. But yeah, instead of trying to explain what I did yesterday, because the way I thought to do it did not work at all, so instead of trying to explain it, I just waited till I started the second foot, which is today. And as you can see right now, it looks kind of weird, like a little toilet almost, with a bowl and like a wall. So essentially what you do is you only crochet half of it, and then you keep turning and doing one less stitch every time. So for mine it was 36, so I only did 18, I turned it at 17, then 16, then 15, and so on. So as you can maybe see here, there is one stitch unworked on each of the ends of the rows. So what I'm going to do now is go around the whole thing, including the stitches that hadn't been worked before, and single crochet into all of those unworked stitches, which will leave me with 36, and it will pull everything together. So it will go from opening this way, and it will pull it to opening like this way. I think what might help is if you do double crochets into the unworked stitches, because that part's a little lower than the part that's been unworked, wholly unworked, to say, like the 18 that you didn't work off in the start. What I have in this pattern is half double crochets, and I think it helps because I did do it before without doing them, and it was looking really bad. So you can kind of see here where the stitches are a bit different, but as you go up, it looks pretty normal, and I think it works pretty well. So now, as you can see, I have single crocheted all of them together, and you can see how it has pulled it to where it was once opening this way. Now it is opening this way, which is slightly diagonal, but the more you work it will start to straighten out and go pretty much at a 90-degree angle, like not quite as you can see here, but enough to where like it's gonna be fine. Like you can probably, if you wanted to, work some stitches into like this part here to try to pull it together. I tried that, and I couldn't figure it out, but I also think this is fine enough for my project. So if you want to figure out something, feel free to let me know if you do, but I think this works pretty good. I think from the video I saw, because I saw another video that showed how to do this method, said it worked better for smaller things, and I guess this is pretty large. It's just a 36 row round, but I think the one they did was only like 16, so a bit easier for smaller rounds, as I'm pretty sure. But I think it works fine for this. So now you just keep working straight up like this, or for whatever project you're doing, you can bend it some more times, I'm sure, and that would be cool as well. So yeah, now I had all the parts assembled, so all I had to do was sew it together. And here you can see in this clip all the parts that I had. Okay, so I just finished up the last piece of my BMO, I'm pretty sure. So I'm gonna show you guys every single piece of it, and then I'll put it together eventually. Probably won't get that done today, because I think that probably is going to take a while. For starters, we have the top and the bottom pieces. Right now I have them rolled up, but they're nothing remarkable. You can see this is about how big they are compared to me, even though you don't really have a frame of reference for how tall I am, but you can see like even this is about how wide he is, essentially. He's very, very large. Maybe I didn't think it through, but you know, it's too late now, isn't it? So next up we have the sides, the left and the right. The BMO is the same direction, so on one side the M is going to be facing toward his face and the other side is going to be facing away, but that's how it looked in the image. This is the back of BMO. I saw a picture and it looks like these are like vents or something. And then this box that I embroidered on there is maybe like where his batteries go. I'm not entirely sure, but this is what I saw, so that's what I did. These pieces are crocheted and then stitched on, and the big square is just embroidered. I did 2 layers, so it was a bit thicker. I think it could maybe use a third, but I think it was really late when I finished the second, so I just went to bed, and I think it looks fine. Maybe a little bumpy, but you know. Next, obviously, is the most recognizable part. It's his front. I think it looks very nice. So the screen I just did with color changes when I was making him, I did a half color change row on the bottom and top so it was more seamless. I did that as well with this black box here. I did it opposite from the black and the blue. On like the side I did the color changes. On this side I made it so the blue stitching was kind of the raised part, so that way the black looked more inset, and on the face I made the light blue the raised part so it looked more raised, because I figured his screen would be like raised. But I mean, it's not very noticeable either way. It's just one little thing that I did. All of these pieces here, these little buttons, are crocheted, and that are crocheted that I stitched on, and they even have some dimension to them if you can see it. So I honestly, it's a lot of fun just pressing them. It's kind of dumb, but it is pretty fun to press them. Oh, and this one is just 5 granny squares, teeny tiny ones that I crocheted together and then crocheted around the border of to do the raising row. These 2 spots down here are hand embroidered, 2 rows like the box on the back is. The eyes are felt that I glued on, and the mouth is embroidered as well, 2 rows. Next I have the arms. They are made so that this fits inside the O of the side. Yeah, so this should be the perfect size to stitch into here. I did 4 fingers because he has 3 fingers and a thumb, so it looks really weird on the bottom. One of my friends said it looked like the bottom of a plastic soda bottle, and I think she's very correct in that. But when you see his arm, usually you see just 3 fingers. So I think looking at it like this, it looks pretty correct, and I don't know how else I would have done it to where the thumb was more separate, but I think he's gonna look fine with arms like this. And I think, like, just because they look weird like this, I mean, I think it's fine. And last but not least, I have his little legs, which I'm sure you've seen the clips for how I did the bend in the crochet, so that was difficult. I'm also like not sure how much I need to stuff these, because as you can see, it's really lumpy, and I don't know if I should stuff it more so it's just super firm, and that way it wouldn't be lumpy, or if I should just try to roll it and do this. Well, that doesn't look good. But I'm not sure if I should just roll it and like just try to squeeze it to where it'll get straighter. That's probably what I'm gonna do, because I want him to still be soft. But these are all the pieces, and I have to stitch them together, and as you can see, he is huge and he's gonna take a while. And I have this giant bag of polyfill too, so I should have enough to fill him with. So what I did first was I sewed together his body, and like if you've ever made a paper cube in like elementary school, maybe even middle school, I don't really remember when I did it, but I remember there was like a paper cube thing, and you cut it out, and it was like a long line, and then the top's here and like the bottom's here, so that way once you'd fold it all together, it would come together. I really don't know how to describe it with my words instead of visually, but so basically I sewed the sides onto the back, and then the front onto one of the sides, and then I sewed the top onto the top of the front and the bottom onto the bottom of the back. So that way I had a side together on everything, and it was one big kind of like blueprint. So I've just finished stitching together the pieces of him, like the box, not like fully, but just as like a map, like one side. So it's one piece now, which is better than it was. And I'm standing on top of my chair so I can try to get it all in frame, because it is huge, as you might imagine. So there's, let's see, there's the left side, his face, the right side, his back, the bottom, oh no, this is the bottom and that's the top. And as you can also see, I added the little dots that I forgot before. Those are like where the sound would come from, since he's like a game machine. And then I sewed the bottom to the bottom and started making it 3D, because what my plan was in the end was to have him like a little trash can. So basically all the sides were together, but then his top was still loose so that I could flip it back and put all his stuffing in before sewing the top shut. And that worked pretty well for me. So I just finished the BMO body, sewing up all his sides and stuffing him. And in case you're wondering how much stuffing it took, an entire 16-ounce bag, I think, the small one, the 16-ounce bag of polyfill, just dumped it right in there, barely half full. I bought this 50-pound bag, and it doesn't look like I got a lot because now that it's loose, it's filling up the whole bag again. But I would say I used like half of this, and I could fill it a lot more, but the thing is, since he is square, if I fill him too much, he kind of loses his shape. He is huge. In case you're wondering, he's like as big as I am when I sit down. I still need to give him his arms and legs, and for some reason he's top heavy, probably because of his buttons, but he's made to be like laying down anyway, and you know, maybe his legs will make him less top heavy because he'll be like having to sit back on them. I don't know, it doesn't really matter. He's ginormous, and I think he's really cute, and I'm really happy with how it's turned out. I was not positive that sewing the pieces together would keep its square shape. I don't know if you can see this way of stitching I used. I don't know the name of the stitch. I know it's not a mattress stitch, which is what I usually use to sew crochet together because it's very seamless. And in this case, I didn't want it to be because I wanted it to have kind of a hinge. So I kind of just went under and around like this, leaving the working yarn kind of exposed to the outside, which in a lot of cases you don't want because it doesn't blend in. But like maybe you can see it here, all the bars. But it makes it hold its shape really nice. Like, obviously, it could be a bit less lumpy and stuff, but that's just based on how you stuff it. I had to go in and, like, move around the stuffing with my hand a lot. And I probably could have done it a bit more, but I think I'm pretty happy with how it looks. So now I just gotta attach the arms and the legs. If I would have filled him as much as he could have been filled, I probably could have used that whole bag of polyfill. But what I found is you had to kind of fill him in a specific way, because he could take a lot of polyfill inside him because he's crochet, they expand, and he was gigantic, is gigantic. So what I found is the more polyfill I put into him, the more he lost his shape. So I ended up taking out a lot of the polyfill that I stuffed inside him at first and moving around with my hands like deep inside to push it into like the corners of it. Because the more I'd have to move it around because he would look lumpy, which was honestly really nice because it made him soft and squishy, and it meant I had to use less polyfill, which is good because he was gigantic and I would need it for the arms and legs, which also looked a bit lumpy once I stuffed them, but I tried to roll them out and they were still a bit lumpy, so it's fine. Honestly, no one else would probably notice except me, the guy who made it, which is kind of always how it is. When you make stuff, you notice all the imperfections. But I ended up using a lot less polyfill than I expected because I had to maintain his shape. So if you're ever making a crochet box in a similar way where you make all the sides, keep that in mind. If you stuff it too much, it will lose its shape. But after that, I just sewed on the arms and the legs and he was done. And in this next clip, I'll show you how big he turned out to be and just how he turned out. So I just finished putting together my big BMO and I'm really pleased with how he turned out. Oh my goodness, he is so large. His arms seem maybe a little long, but honestly, I am perfectly fine. I think he's adorable, and he is huge. And he has some fuzz on his face too. I cannot believe that I made this. It is so crazy. It took so long and so many skeins of yarn, but let me give you a little 360 view, a little tour. So obviously here's his face with his buttons and his little video game port, his face. Even down here, I think these are like his controller slots, if I remember from the TV show. He's got his little feet here. They look a bit weird from the front, but from the side, you can kind of see. They kind of get their shape a bit better. Maybe you can see. But it's the best I could do, you know? Here's this side. I got his arms going into the O of the BMO pretty good. Let me see. The back with his vents and his, like, battery. The part where the batteries go, I think. And I mean, there's nothing very interesting about the top and the bottom. But wow. Jeez, I cannot believe I cannot believe it. This took me so long, and it looks way better than I expected. I'm really pleased with this guy. And yeah, he is gigantic, and he's definitely the biggest amigurumi that I have ever made, but I am very pleased with how he turned out. He's so cute, and he is gigantic, and my friend was very, very pleased with it. Very surprised that I made it, which me too, because that thing is gigantic. I was sharing this process with a couple of my friends as I was making it, because if you like share your process as you go, it kind of makes the project seem like more rewarding, because you have these milestones like, oh, I'll send them a picture after I finish this, and then you kind of like have that little sense of accomplishment in certain steps of it. So I was sending them pictures of it, and once it was done and it was huge, of course they were surprised, because so was I. One of them ended up telling me that that's the kind of thing that sells on Etsy for like $100, which is true, because like the materials, it was like 7 skeins of yarn, a giant bag of polyfill. It was probably like $40, maybe a bit more if I didn't have discounts when I bought the yarn, for like all the materials, and then plus all the time I spent working on it. I honestly would probably charge like maybe closer to 200 on a project like that, because it took me 3 weeks, I think, ended up being. But I'm really happy with the process, and it was a gift, and I decided last year that this year I was going to give all my friends crochet presents, because I have all this yarn, and you know, why not just, I love making stuff, so why not use an excuse of a friend's birthday to make something. Now, hopefully all my friends don't expect to get a 3-foot tall BMO, because even though he's only 20 inches tall with his legs, he's a bit taller. So yeah, he ends up being about 3 feet, I guess. So he's really big, but you know, that is what I was going for, even if I wasn't going for quite that big. But I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I hope you guys enjoyed this process video, and also I hope you guys like the finished product, because it took me so much time. So let me know what you think of my BMO in the comment section below, and like, comment, subscribe, because I'll be back next week with more crochet and DIY based content.